were smart in the Middle Ages, you probably studied this guy, Aristotle. And he was really the focus of much of the educational system of the Middle Ages. But then in this time period, once we start going into a more global society, there start to be new philosophers like John Locke. John Locke was an Englishman and a philosopher. He started writing right around the time of the Glorious Revolution, when there were limits put on the King and the Queen of England. One of his two most notable writings is something called the Essay Concerning Human Understanding. In it, he writes about something, an older idea, that human beings are born a blank slate. And from there, we learn. And we are capable of learning. This quote represents that idea. His other major work was the Two Treaties of Government, where he lays out the ideas of what we now call a social contract. The first part of this contract is that all human beings, or all men, are born with certain rights. He called them basically natural rights. And you would recognize them because they are life, liberty. No, I know you were thinking something else. It's actually property. Life, liberty, and property. The second part was that if your government doesn't ensure your natural rights, you have the right to revolt and overthrow the government, which is really important for us here in America because these are the ideas that Thomas Jefferson read and put into the Declaration of Independence. This philosophical movement started with Locke and a couple other people, really takes off and grows in France, and that movement is called the Enlightenment. In France, these philosophers were called philosophes, so it's spelled correctly there without an R. And probably one of the most famous is a guy named Voltaire. And Voltaire was kind of a funny guy, and he had a lot of things he wanted to express. Voltaire was anti-aristocracy, he was anti-organized religion, but he was pro-free speech. He also was fond of science, and he wrote novels, and his most famous novel is Candide, which is a satire. Voltaire was the kind of guy who liked to make fun of people in power, to point out what was wrong with them, and that sometimes got him in trouble. He most famously was put in jail in the notorious prison, the Bastille, which later on is going to play a big role in French history. This is probably why Voltaire was such a big fan of free speech. He famously said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I defend your right to say it." A popular idea amongst Enlightenment philosophers was the belief in deism. And what deism is God is not this big, all-powerful, all-knowing creature. Instead, he's more like a clockmaker. And a clockmaker, if you've ever looked inside a clock, it's very complicated, all these little parts. And he sets it all up and just lets it run. So he's not involved in our day-to-day affairs. He simply established a system that is rational and logical, but complicated. The last really big idea in the Enlightenment was the idea of progress. They believed through science and rational thought that human beings could get ahead.